Hey there, everybody. This is Bill MacDonald, the writing and reading doctor. Today is lesson 1 out of 20 on our reading and writing webinar, focusing on first on expository, answering questions, how to get zeros, ones, twos, threes, and expository and persuasive, how to get fours. That's worth up to 16 points for those of you who are taking the end of course in 9th and 10th grade, and it's worth up to 3 points for those of you who are starting to do essay responses to questions that have the organization of answering the question, and B, developing your answer by giving textual evidence, explaining in great detail why you chose your answer, giving examples from the text, explaining what you mean, and C, having good conventions, pretty decent grammar. But before we get to 3 land and 4 land, we've got to make sure we understand why students can get a 0. Yes, there can be zeros. There are hundreds of thousands of zeros that are given in 9th and 10th grade over the years that have been given. In 4th and 7th grade, expository used to get lots of zeros. One year, there were 24,000 zeros in 4th grade for right about something, an invention. What invention do you think is important to you? And since kids didn't even know what an invention was, they did not know what to write. So of course they would get zeros because they were completely off topic. They had nothing to do with the topic. The year before, they asked them, write about something that's difficult. And normally prompts in 4th grade were positive. Since many students wrote about things that were negative, that's the opposite of what the topic, what the question, what the prompt was talking about. They got 14,000 zeros. One year in 9th grade, the last year they did open-ended short answer questions. On one of the questions, 200,000 students got either a 0 because they couldn't even answer the question, or a 1 because they couldn't give textual evidence. And so today's video, lesson 1, part 1, is going to be just on what gets you to 0 land. And sometimes, because of the world we're living in right now, kids are not necessarily unable to get a 0. They're just unwilling. And so sometimes the reason that we give zeros is because the kids are in la la land. And I'm going to show you in our first 4 lessons how to go from 0 land, worth 0 points, times 2 for expository and persuasive, all the way up to 4 points times 2, 8, times 2, 16 points for you end of course kids that are taking the test in December. And for those of you who are trying to get an idea how to get 0s, 1s, 2s, and 3s on constructed response, open-ended short answer, how to get 2s by giving textual evidence, and how to get 3s on essays for reading questions for development with decent conventions. So what I did was I made an octopus, and of course an octopus has 8 legs. And so using something that the Texas Education Agency sent out in the year 2015, for some reason they waited 3 or 4 years into STAR to tell us why we were getting zeros. And so you'll see a little bit of that document tonight in part of our video. You'll see where I got the idea from, but you can either copy, those of you who purchased the webinar, you can either copy, because I'm going to send you, I have sent you the PDF of the file that you'll see. And so you can either copy or have your students try to creatively draw their own octopus and the 8 reasons that I'm going to show you that can get you a 0. And we're even going to look at some 1s in elementary, some 0s in elementary and compare them to 1s. And we're going to look at some 0s in secondary and compare those to 1s, because writing is very subjective. A score that students get whenever it's open-ended, it's always going to be subjective. Means it's basically one person's opinion or 2 people's opinion. And what's going to probably happen is if the 2 people agree, then they give the student 2 points. I don't think this is going to happen, but in expository and persuasive right now for end of course, if 2 people give the paper a 2, it gets a 2 and a 2, makes 4 times 2 is 8. If one person gives it a 3 and one gives it a 2, that's 5 times 2 is 10. I don't think that they're going to double the score for sure. On our new reading format, you're just either going to get 3 points, or at the most they could possibly give 6 if they're going to put a lot of value to the essays. Only secondary used to double the score. So I would imagine if they choose to double the score, they might only do that in secondary, where in elementary, 3rd through 5th grade, it's probably just going to be worth up to 3 points or possibly 0. So without further ado, let me share my screen with you so you can see. This is what I came up with. 8 reasons you can get 2 0s, also known as unscorable, on open-ended, extended responses, essays in response to a reading question, or actual expository or persuasive compositions. So there are 8 reasons. And so the first reason, you can see it right there. The essay is blank. Reason number 1, there's nothing in response to the question. So if they give lines and the students are supposed to type out something, there's nothing there. If there's nothing there, that's not enough quantity for the reader to give the student a chance to check the quality. So here are the other 7 reasons. You see that the octopus has his 8 little legs, and I labeled them for you. So we've gotten the first idea out of the way. So we'll kind of check these off as we go. Things that we are taking a star test, so I guess I'll draw little stars. If it's blank, nothing in response, you will get 1 0 or 2 zeros. The second one, if it's off topic, if you don't answer the question, if you respond completely differently and write things that have nothing to do with the question, we're going to think of the question as the red light, and your student's getting a 0 until you can answer that question. Normally questions are going to be based on who, what, when, where, why, which, how, or whether, not the climate, but whether or not something. So the next one, even though the extended or the short answer, it's just going to be a few words or a phrase, as we know. If it's indecipherable, in terms of its penmanship or illegible in terms of the grammar, if they can't string together enough letters to make words that make sense and words to make a phrase that makes sense or a sentence, then your students can get a 0. Now, this next one is only for uh, 3rd through 5th typically, because up to 5th grade, you can either test in reading in English or Spanish. So if your student is taking the English test and they write primarily in Spanish or some other language, then they will get a 0. Keyword there is primarily. So for 6th through 10th grade, it's all in English. So if the student is very Spanish dominant, that's going to hurt them if they can't come up with enough English words written down, typed onto the computer that the reader can understand. So hopefully there'll be some accommodations, some modifications in place to help kids this first year that they do it. But this year in 9th and 10th grade, if your student writes too much in the wrong language, they will get a 0. Octopus leg number 5, insufficient. If there's not enough there, not enough quantity to judge the quality, then they wouldn't be able to score that. There has to be enough writing that seemingly answers the question or responds to the topic or the prompt. Every time I touch the top of my head, the top. I remember if I make a circle around my head and I draw a little line right here, that's a question. If we ask the students a question about who, what, when, where, why, which, how, whether, and there's not enough there, then they can give it a 0 for insufficient response. Okay. Now, the 6th leg of the octopus is no original writing. If I ask you a question, what do you think the character was feeling after he fell down? I think that the character was feeling something after he fell down. Well, all you basically did was rewrite the question. So if the prompt says, write about how working hard can cause someone to be successful, if all you write is working hard to be successful is important, and that's all there is, all you did was restate the prompt. And so since there's no original writing, there's nothing except the prompt words there. Sometimes students in expository and persuasive, they'll just copy things from the read section, the think section, and they'll just restate the prompt exactly. Well, all of that is not their head, that's on the prompt page. And so if all they do is rewrite on answering a question words from the passage, but nothing comes from their head, it means they didn't answer the question. And so in order to get to land, you've got to go through one land. And so if all the reader sees is text from the passage, then there's not going to be any original writing. There's nothing from the student's head. So they would most likely get a 0. Okay. They're going to be asked a question, normally from an informative passage. And if the student uses the wrong purpose, if they write a poem with poetry, if they write out scenes in a play, if they write lyrics to a song, and it has nothing to do with answering the question or responding to the topic, then that's the seventh leg, the way to get a zero. You have to answer the question uh, explaining yourself. You can do explanatory or informatory uh, in terms of the what you're responding. And if you do that, then you could possibly get to one land, two land, or three land on essays, and you could possibly get to four land if you're working on expository or persuasive. Now, this one, number 8, the eighth leg, it happens a lot. Students are going through a lot of burnout, discouragement, disillusionment. And so if there's a refusal to write, if they tell you, you can't make me do this, I'm not going to do this, or if they write, I'm not going to do this, I don't want to do this, if they write bad words on the paper, for example, then there's an obvious written refusal to write there. If all they do is respond with something derogatory to the teacher or to the reader that's intended to just be a refusal to write instead of answering the question, then the state can give a zero. Now, let me clear these drawings. I want to show you on the next page, on page 12. Got to first go back to the mouse. On page 12, how to stop what? How to stop getting zeros. This year, because many of you were already wanting to build that foundation and start asking open-ended questions and requiring textual evidence and giving essay responses, I felt like I needed to make something to help you with that. And so I made a traffic light called 1, 2, 3 with WWE. Okay, notice that the 1 is red, and you can see down here, let me use my spotlight so you can see what I'm talking about right here. How to get a 1 is going to be a W. How to get a 2, yellow, is going to be a W. And how to get a 3 is going to be an E. This is going to be for open-ended, short answer, extended, constructed, and essay responses. And so let's take a look at what I have, and I'll kind of blow this up a little bit bigger for you so you can see. Move this out of the way so you can see what we have here. All right, so if we think of the red light being what is the question, the topic, or the prompt, in the question, your students are going to be looking for words like what, who, what, when, where, why, which, or how, or for persuasive, or sometimes for expository prompts, they're going to have the word whether. Okay. In ninth grade, they had the word how as part of the prompt, which you can think of the prompt is sort of like a question. How does blah, blah, blah lead to blah, blah, blah? And 10th grade, the topic, the prompt was using the word which. In end of course essays only, they're going to start with the keywords write and write. In section 3, there'll be a read section, section 1, a think section, section 2, and they'll brainstorm, bling or blah ideas. And then the write section will be the third section for you end of course students. It'll either be write about the importance of something, or persuasive is often write about whether or not. But like I mentioned, this last year and end of course, they said in ninth grade, how can something lead to something? That's called a cause and effect. So if you think, how can something, that would be the cause, lead to something, that would be the effect. Since it's a two-part topic, if they don't respond to two parts in their answer, their red light, then they will not be able to completely get a 1. If you only answer part of the question, then you're only going to get part of a 1, and there's nothing, no such thing as, so you'll get a 0 for that. Okay, so the red light, how to get the 1, what is the answer? In order to get a 1 on an essay on expository and persuasive, we need a thesis or a position statement. They have to look for something that clearly responds to the topic in a complete sentence. Okay, in short answer, in order to get a 1 in the newly constructed responses, one way is they're just going to have your kids, depending on subjects, write a number, use a grid, write a symbol, a word, an equation, and I'll spotlight so that, or use my arrow here. We'll start that over. And the number, I'm in the parentheses here, a grid, a symbol, a word, an equation or inequality that's with math, a phrase, meaning a group of words, a complete sentence, table, graph, multi-part, drag and drop, all those are going to be worth 1 point. So if they don't answer those kinds of questions, then of course they didn't make it to the red light. They didn't get a 1. Okay, so the easiest, one of the easiest ways is to restate or repeat part of the question. What are some of the words in the question or the prompt, and of course, that I can use to help me respond? This does not mean that I have to restate or repeat the entire question or prompt several times. And if that's all you do is just keep restating or repeating the question over and over, that's going to probably not help you at all. You might squeeze out a 1 with some readers, but many readers, if all you're doing on an extended or an essay response is just repeating words from the prompt or words from the passage over and over, you're probably going to end up with a 0. So the second thing that I want you to look at, come out, stop sharing for a moment. I'm going to make sure that when I come back out and I come back in, that what I want to show you that I sent you also is sometimes we have to, we're better at talking than we are at reading. So I would highly suggest you ask your kids a bunch of who, what, when, where, why, which, or how questions. And it can be about any topic that you want. And practice that with your kids. Where do you live? Who is your best friend? And they can practice using some of the words from the question, most of the words, but have them try to practice rephrasing some of the words so they can go from a 0 to at least a 1 by at least thinking of what we saw on the stoplight. Wow, what other words could I use besides the exact words of the question or the prompt or the topic to respond with my answer? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen for a second time. If you are from elementary, then I want you to look at this one. And I was able to get some help from some teachers. Let me show you the prompt first. It had, as we mentioned, section 1 says read, section 2 says, section 2 is to think, brainstorming. Section 3 is the right section. And so try to make sure your kids in 9th and 10th grade, those December retesters, have them focus right away on the right section. Underline the word right, and they can circle all of the key words. And so this 1 year was one reason that you like being in 4th grade. And so that should be the idea. So because the second part says, tell what you like about 4th grade. So they could have asked the kids an open-ended question, what do you like about 4th grade? The second part, why do you like 4th grade? A what and a why. And in order to get to one land, as you can see there, clearly state your central idea. 2 land organize, 3 land develop, 4 land choose your words carefully. And in order to hold on to the 3 or the 4, make sure you have good conventions. And so what you'll see is the state document that was sent out that was basically all those reasons on the octopus that will get you the 0. And what I'm trying to do with the stop sign is show you how to stop that from happening. And so since we need to know what a 1 looks like, I highly suggest, if you're a teacher in 9th or 10th grade, use the scoring guides for a 1 to help you differentiate between what a 1 looks like and what a 0 from the page before looks like. And so what I've done for you is I've found from several teachers some help what some zeros look like. If all you're going to do is write the alphabet over and over, that's not answering the question or responding to the topic. I like something and something and something, and I like something. Since I couldn't understand enough of that quantity, I won't be able to grade it for the quality of responding. We don't even know anything about what they like about 4th grade. And so this one here, you can see it's all in Spanish. So probably what happened, if the question was an English question and you answer in Spanish, I see the word yes there. That's not enough English words to at least get a 1. And so this probably got a 0 for being in the wrong language. And you can see here, this is a 2. That when you get a 2, let me show you with my fingers, it means 2 different people decided to give it a 1. Now, if we're thinking of just regular reading, this would get a 1 because both people gave this paper a 1, but it was barely enough to answer. There's only enough there to answer the question. So whenever you see the score on the top like that, that's an actual student. When the scores are at the bottom and with an explanation, that's from the state. And what I've done, I've tried on as many as I could. I gave not on these, I believe, but on the secondary ones, which I'll show you in a minute, I gave kind of reasons. So if you look at the different essays that I provided you, you can see what got the kids zeros. So if you just have random words, that's going to be 0 for non-scorable. And this is not just going to apply for expository and persuasive. This is going to apply to short answer, extended, and essay responses for reading starting next year. So I highly suggest that you look through these if you're an elementary teacher. And for secondary, let me come out, stop showing for a second. And so you can see my pretty little face one more time. If you're a secondary teacher, if you're part of the webinar, I've also sent you a zeros I like for secondary. Here it is right here. Their prompt 1 year was, it says, write. We could underline the word write, and we can circle the keywords. Write an essay explaining whether there's our W word. A positive attitude, cause, helps a person be successful. Okay. So since that's two parts, this is a two-part question. And I really have a feeling that because reading is about comparing and contrasting, cause and effect, conflict resolution, there might be some two-part questions. And so if the question has two parts, there are some, one of the responses said the answer to part A depends on part B, or the answer to part B depends on part A. Part of one of the constructed type responses shows you that in order to get your point, you're going to have to respond to both the cause and the effect. If you only respond to one or the other, then I would imagine that wouldn't be clearly answering the question. So again, in 7th grade, they used to call it a controlling idea, but in 8th, 9th, they called it a thesis statement about how having a positive attitude. And so that's positive, helps a person be successful. That's positive. Okay. So keeping that in mind, when I clear the answers, what I did for you guys as well is I looked for some essays that got 1 + 1 is 2. This student would actually get 4 points for this. And so what I did for you secondary teachers, I went ahead and wrote on the bottom, because our 911 is in December, we've got to at least get those kids who are in 0 land to 1 land. And so if you look through here, then you can see this person, 2 different people felt like it was unscorable. And so just in case you're new to writing, to reading possibly as well, when they scored the essays, the first reader did not know what the second reader put, and vice versa. And the only way that a person could get a 0, non-scorable, was that if 2 people agreed when they scored the paper independently from each other that it would be a 0. So if one person put a 0, if you look at me in the picture here, and the other person put a 1, well, in all types of responses, 0 means unscorable for those 8 octopus reasons. One person can't say it's unscorable and one person gives it a 1. Either one of those is wrong. So they would throw out those 2 scores and they would have somebody else grade, possibly another reader, or maybe a manager of those graders would read it and give it a score. And then if it's expository persuasive, whatever they would give, if it's 2 1s, then the person would get 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. I remember one time a school that I worked with, they accidentally gave the student a 0 for being off topic, but the school felt like the student did respond to the topic. So they challenged the score and it was moved from a 0 all the way to a 3 or a 4, but that does cost money for your school if you're going to challenge a score. So if you get a chance and you really want to study the differences between zeros, that one got a 4. So remember on the top, it means that 2 different people gave it a 2. And so you might think, well, that's not enough there. Well, that's a 7th grader. They felt like there was enough there. And so what I did on the bottom was kind of justified. I tried to explain my own opinion on why I felt the student got the score. 2, very limited. That means 2 different people gave it a 1. 2, very limited. 2, very limited. Okay. This is a readiness. And so back then, the standards might have been a little bit different. I'm not entirely sure. And so I only see 3 words here. And so I'm not sure, like in my personal opinion, if you just write happy, sad, and mad, I don't think on short answer, open-ended, respond to a question, that happy, sad, and mad are going to cut it on a 3rd through 8th grade response. It's not going to cut it on 9th or 10th grade. Perhaps the standards were different on readiness. I was a little bit confused with that. In my opinion, that's what a 0 would look like in terms of a secondary response. Okay. And again, it's all very subjective. So just read through those if you get a chance. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you to all of you who purchased the how to get a 0, 1, 2, and 3 on reading questions, and how to get a 4 on expository and persuasive for those of you that are testing in December. That's going to be part 1. Part 2 will be editing, because all of you from 3rd through 8th grade will be taking field test questions. You're going to get 6 questions. And if it's editing, it says on the schematic, the test design schematic for 3rd through 8th grade, that you're going to get 2 shorter passages than what they're normally getting in the reading. And they'll be just asking questions about 6 sentences in the passage. And so it's very important that those of you in high school have your kids focus on the 9 questions, because in ninth and 10th grade, you're going to get 9 editing and 9 revising. In 3rd through 8th grade, even though it's only field tested, part 2 is going to be on editing. The 2 passages that you're going to get that will be field tested this year and count against your students next year, editing with conventions. Part 3 will be revising, and it would be 1 passage that's a little bit longer with 6 questions from 3rd through 8th grade, or 9th grade and 10th grade will have 9 questions in more than likely 2 passages of editing, 2 passages of revising. And then part 4 will be focusing on ideas and strategies for the most difficult reading questions that I noticed from 3rd all the way through 10th grade. And I came up with some skills and some strategies. So it won't necessarily be 20 days in a row. I put in my description that at every 2 or 3 days, you're going to get a video. And so lesson 1 is going to come in 2 parts. I'm going to focus on how to make sure kids can get a 1 with prompts and topics, and how kids can get a 1 on questions that are constructed responses or just short answer, as long as they answer the question. So thank you to those of you who purchased the webinar. We'll see you in lesson 1, part 2. Have a good evening.